Hello and welcome to my classroom management plan. A quick overview, we're going to be covering organizational physical environment all the way through communication with parents. So let's start right off. One of the key points that I want to emphasize about organizing the physical environment is the seating. For string orchestra, you must be close enough so that you can hear within your section and across the ensemble, but far enough away for your stand partner to allow for the full range of motion. This brings us to the consideration that the environment must emphasize safety. No player is safe if they could get their eye poked by a stray up bow. A specific need of instrumental music ensembles is a designated space for lockers to store instruments as well. It is ideal for these to be along the perimeter of the classroom to allow for minimal foot traffic congestion. Additionally, for an instrumental music classroom, having designated space available for small ensembles and individual student practice is vital to encourage practice habits and move between various activities within a class. Lastly, having student resources readily available in a highly visible and accessible location allows for students to operate independently in the classroom. Let's get into expectations, procedures, and routines. One of my key takeaways from learning about establishing classroom norms is the difference between principles and rules. What I learned was that a rule is best phrased using behavioral wording, whereas a principle is best phrased using moral wording. For example, my first rule for the classroom norms assignment was be kind to your instrument and to your fellow student. This is effective as a principle, but ineffective as a rule. To transform it into an effective rule, you could rephrase it as students will maintain and care for their instrument's safety. This focuses the rule on a specific behavior rather than a vague notion of kindness. From our classroom discussion on consequences and the textbook reading, I learned about the importance of sequencing consequences in an escalating fashion. This helps students understand why they are receiving the certain level of consequence that they are. Additionally, I learned that consequences are effective when they are used to get students to pause, reflect, and then redirect their attention. Being able to provide consequences to students as positive reinforcement for an on-task behavior allows consequences to be viewed as options available to students based on their decisions, opposed to being seen strictly as punishment tools. For example, the consequences I developed to pair with my classroom rules allowed for a positive consequence of earning a cleaning day for students' instruments if they were consistently treating their instruments with care. The last point I will make on this is I want to talk about the last point on this slide that I want to talk about relates to procedures. I learned through this course that procedures can be most effective when they emerge through connections to content and are built into lessons. Following the general practice of I do, we do, you do allows for students to move from the individual to the group and then back to the individual as a means of framing the behavior under focus for the procedure. Our assignment. Next, we're going to talk about the first days of school. The three things I want to underscore that this course helped me to grasp are the significance of rapport building, the primacy of procedures in the initial learning process, and the importance of pacing content. Our assignment to craft a first week lesson plan was an opportunity to brainstorm and practice putting together a few activities to foster connection in the classroom from the start of the school year. As someone with a strong intrinsic motivation to pursue academic activities, I've always personally struggled with understanding and fully participating in these rapport building activities. However, as a teacher, their efficacy to me is without a doubt. To build a sense of trust and community in your classroom allows for students to feel a sense of safety and allows them to participate in the messy and risky process of learning. Procedures in these first few days of school connect with this idea of trust and safety in the classroom. Procedures in the classroom create an atmosphere of consistency and provide the student with a roadmap to drive the metaphorical highway that is the lesson. Without the directions that procedures in these first weeks provide, the overall learning environment is compromised. Like it was mentioned in the slide before, allowing procedures to flow from content as organically and fluidly as possible allows for new behavioral expectations to be introduced. This is effective because it allows for a slow introduction of new behavioral expectations instead of cramming them into one session or letting them pop up inorganically. This slow approach is essential not only for procedures, but also for introducing content area knowledge. When you play a musical instrument, you quickly realize that if you can't play a piece of music slowly and with good technique and accuracy, you won't be able to precisely play it when you speed it up. This translates more broadly to the delivery of content in a classroom. If you gloss over the fundamentals or treat content delivery like a race to be hurried through, your metaphorical top speed will be less than what it could be if you had taken the time to slowly introduce fundamental concepts and work through them methodologically. Let's shift gears and talk about challenging behaviors and bullying. The textbook speaks to this point by phrasing the approach to addressing these behaviors as a process of finding the why. This is particularly interesting to me because it frames the solving of behavioral problems in the classroom as a sort of investigation or diagnostic process. This perspective is refreshing because it deviates from a common misconception that challenging behaviors in the classroom are strictly the result of bad students. Behavioral problems can be an expression of learning difficulties, a reflection of normalized behavior in the household, or any number of reasons other than a judgment of moral character. As a future educator, I want to strive to avoid thinking about my students as bad learners by instead assuming that the best and helping them reach the high expectations that I set for them. The textbook puts forward the suggestion that the teacher should nurture positive connections, especially with the students that are struggling with behavior issues. Another strategy that stood out for its potential efficacy is the use of I statements when talking through the reasons why a certain behavior is problematic with the student. Through the use of I statements, for example, Bobby, I feel interrupted and distracted when you play your cello loudly, when I'm giving instructions to the violins. This statement shifts the focus to your perspective as the teacher and gives the student a new framing for their own behavior and its consequences. Another interesting strategy for persistent challenging behaviors is to deploy a behavior contract with a specific student or an entire class. As teachers, we can choose to make social contracts between the student and the teacher implicit or explicit. It can be an effective strategy to curtail problematic behaviors when the implicit expectations for behavior are made verbally explicit. Closely related to challenging behaviors, let's dive into the topic of building/managing relationships with students in the classroom. A vital aspect of nurturing healthy relationships in the classroom, underscored by the textbook, is to assume the best about your students. Specifically, the author makes a distinction between two types of assumptions: limiting assumptions versus positive assumptions. As the name implies, a limiting assumption assumes a negative judgment. In the process, this forecloses possibilities for the student to make improvements and grow. Conversely, a positive assumption allows for students to grow towards your expectations and promote an environment of constructiveness and trust. Another fundamental of healthy relationships in the classroom that the textbook highlights as essential is the idea of inner authority, which can be understood simply as knowing your position of power in the classroom and exercising it with conviction and care. Let me give an example of how I hope to apply this concept in the classroom. Part of having an inner authority is being able to gracefully and sincerely apologize if you mess up as an educator. In my future classroom, I hope that if I make an error in using an instructional strategy, which is almost inevitable, that I can take the heat for my mistake without compromising my position of authority, all the while making my apology sincere. The class assignment of making an About Me flyer gave me an opportunity to explore the pitfalls that come with self-disclosure of personal information in the classroom. Throughout the assignment, I had to consider, is this information something that will foster a healthy connection between my student and I, or is it unnecessary oversharing? To walk this line of being friendly but not a friend to a student is a challenge that I foresee in the future for me. However, I'm confident that this class has provided me with the tools to navigate this challenge. As a teacher, we have to be comfortable sometimes being the focus of dissatisfaction among students. This can be most prevalent when navigating healthy boundaries with technology in the classroom. I plan to use cell phone cubbies or to adopt whatever the regulations are for my school or the district. However, I am relieved by the thought of utilizing technology for a positive impact on my students' learning. In instrumental music classes, the possibility for technology to aid in the development of the craft is enormous. The power of a metronome and a drone cannot be understated. It serves a dual function: instructional and for classroom management purposes. It is an instructional aid because it allows for internalizing of pulse and scaffolding for rhythmic ideas, while allowing the conductor to relinquish their role as a timekeeper in order to expand their focus to other classroom needs. Technology in the music classroom can also promote parent involvement. You can stream rehearsals and concerts to interested parents. You can archive performances digitally for distribution later to parents. This increase in the ability for parents to buy into their students' education can be a driving force in the classroom's relationships. Building off this point, the teacher interview assignment for this course provided an opportunity for me to explore classroom management strategies through the eyes of a veteran teacher. He was able to impart to me valuable information about communicating effectively with parents and how that connects to classroom management. He emphasized that in communications with parents, you should strive for directness, enthusiasm, and brevity. This approach signals that you as a teacher value the parent's time, that you want them to be involved in their child's education. He recommended that a parents' night at the start of the year creates a launching pad for the symbiotic relationship to take off. And with that, that concludes my classroom management portfolio. Thank you for listening.